I'm glad you're with us. We've got a great guest today. Of course, Bill Nugent returns to give us some information related to the emotional well-being side of the house. And what we'd like to do is give you an email that we had, I think, alluded to providing earlier, and we want to make sure you have it. And that is the email to send any comments to the judicial branch that you want you on or consider. Send to the following email address. You can see it there for stakeholder meeting comments. That's comments COVID-19 at courts.maine.gov. We ask, if you could, to copy Angela and or I on any comments you send in, so that we know what's going to the courts, and we can make sure we reinforce those concerns at the stakeholders meeting that starts Thursday at 9:30 a.m. We will have representatives from our Board of Governors, the Family Law section, the Employment Law section, the Business Law section, and the Litigation section there at the stakeholders meeting. So
and Real Estate section.
Yes, and the Real Estate section with Chair Allison King. She'll be there too. And it's amazing how many different sections are involved with concerns related to reopening courts, like the real estate section, for instance. I didn't know, but they're of course very involved in foreclosures. So they have a stake in one to figure out how foreclosures are going to be essentially restarted, and all the procedures involved with it, of course. And so with that, you also have the opportunity to listen to the meetings and participate that way. And the live stream connection is available at that URL that's listed on the slide too. I think it's the same live stream that you use to listen to law court arguments. And I think you go to the same place to find it. With that, I did want to let you know that there have been some questions from bar members about how the 49-day stay rule works related to cases outside of the state court system, like probate court, for instance, but also how the 49-day rule applies going forward. So we are going to attempt to address that at the stakeholders meeting too, if not addressed sooner. Okay, with that, we have Bill Nugent as our guest today. And Bill, I appreciate you sharing your time with us for the next few minutes. Bill.
Thank you. Thank you, Thad. Good morning, everyone. I decided to call my talk this morning, entitle it The Serenity Prayer. It's not just for theists anymore. Many of you are familiar with the Serenity Prayer. It has been established and is a part of most every 12-step meeting all over the world. It's actually was attributed most often to the American theologian Reinhold Niebuhr, but the concepts that are contained in it can be found in the wisdom traditions of all over the world that have existed for millennia. And for those of you who are not familiar with the Serenity Prayer, it goes like this: God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Now, as I said, you don't have to be a theist to understand the importance and the significance of this prayer. If you eliminate the first word, it becomes a proverb or an affirmation. The wisdom and the importance of it doesn't decrease at all. One of the things I think that is really important in this is that how much it applies to what's going on right now in these crazy days of COVID-19. But the ideas are to accept the immutable, the courage, the fortitude, and the energy to change the things that we can, and then the knowledge to be able to distinguish one from the other, which may be the most difficult aspect of it all. I think the first kind of element of this, which is to accept the things like the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, is tough for lawyers. We are advocates. We are used to getting things done, to making changes, to advocating for our clients, no matter how difficult it is. We don't like to accept the fact that we can't be successful. And I think all of us in the course of our careers have on occasion taken a case that we know really deep down in our hearts is a lost cause, but we still move forward anyway and advocate on behalf of our clients. So I think it's kind of tough for us to do that. The important thing I think to understand is acceptance is not the same thing as liking. We can accept things that are inevitable. We may not like them, but we can accept them, and we need to put them aside and move on. And I think that's what the serenity aspect of that is about. The second part, changing the things that we can, I think is right up our alley. We're used to that. We're advocates. We can move forward. We have the energy to make changes, and we can do it. And the third part is a little bit more difficult. It's the knowledge to be able to distinguish the one from the other. And I think, again, with attorneys, we may have, in some cases, an inflated view of our ability to solve problems. So it's important to be able to distinguish those two aspects, what we can change, what we can't change, and really be able to understand which is which. I think it's particularly applicable to what's going on now, as I said. And I think it's helpful for us to look at those things that we are unable to control, given this pandemic. And among them are predicting what's going to happen. And I'm certainly guilty of that. I think most everybody is. We spend a tremendous amount of energy trying to figure out, okay, what is really going to happen? Is it going to be 100,000 deaths? Is it going to be 200,000 deaths? What's the impact on the economy? The reality is we really don't have any control over that. And we may not like whatever result comes, but there's nothing we can do about it. So we need to let it pass. Same thing for how long is this going to last? Is my family 4th of July party out of the question now? Is the wedding that's scheduled for Labor Day weekend going to be able to be held? Because of what will social distancing rules be at that point? We don't know that. We don't like the fact that we don't know it, but there's nothing we can do about it. So again, we have to move on. And another thing that's, I think, important to put into the let it go category is how other people are behaving or reacting during this pandemic. I know I got very frustrated looking at newsreels of people in California and Florida and other places going to the beaches and clearly not practicing social distancing, not wearing masks. But again, there's nothing that I can really do about that, and nothing any of us can do about that. Also, the reactions and motivations of other people are things over which we have very little control. And one of the things I've had a problem with is trying to figure out, when did science become a political issue? That's been raised frequently during the course of this pandemic. And I don't know the answer to it, but even if I did know the answer, there's not much that I can do. Worrying doesn't get us anywhere. There's a needle point in a frame in the waiting room of a therapist that I know, and I think it's very appropriate now. It says, "Worrying is like a rocking chair. It'll give you something to do, but it won't get you anywhere." I think that's so true. So let's look at what things we can control, and those are the things that are important to focus upon. For me, an issue that's particularly acute, and I think it is for many people, is controlling the amount of news we take in. Turning off the news when we need to turn it off. I have pretty much foregone any kind of broadcast news because I just get so riled up about it. But I have to say that I spend far too much time on my smartphone going through articles about the pandemic, and it's almost addictive. It is really hard to do, and it does not inure to my benefit, nor I think does it inure to anybody else's benefit to do that. So it's one thing we can control, and it's not necessarily easy to do, but I think it's important to do. Following the CDC recommendations, that's something we have control over, and it's very important. Do we wash our hands as often as we should? Do we wear a mask whenever we should? Do we use hand sanitizers? Do we keep social distancing? These are things we can control and we really need to focus on because they're very, very important. Exercise. Another thing that can be very difficult for some people who are used to going to the gym, because all of the gyms are closed now. But it's still very important to get exercise. And for those who don't get exercise, I'm part of that, I guess, we need to make sure we concentrate on doing that. That is something we have control, and it's really important that we continue or take it up to do it. The other thing we have control over, I think, that's important, again, is social media, our use of social media. It's wonderful in one respect because it keeps us connected to people when we can't see them personally. And there's a certain irony I've experienced, and maybe some others have too, that I actually am now in contact more with some people than I have been when there hasn't been a pandemic going on, because I want to check in, see how things are going. And social media is very helpful for that. However, we have to be careful that we don't use social media to essentially have I guess you'd call it a pity party of everybody complaining of how bad this is, how horrible this is, because it doesn't really help us to do that. It's very easy to fall into. I was in a Zoom support group a few weeks ago, one that I actually really like. We have it in person, except we have to do it in Zoom during this pandemic. And I realized after an hour and a half that I felt a whole lot worse after the meeting than I did before. And that's never happened before. But what occurred during the meeting was everybody was talking about how horrible this was, how terrible it was, how they couldn't stand it anymore. And it's easy to get into that mindset, but it shouldn't be reinforced. So it's important using social media for a positive purpose and not necessarily just for a place to complain. We also have control over what our attitude is, how we deal with this. It's not necessarily easy. We can't always go around smiling, saying, oh, this isn't so bad, because in many cases it is very bad. But our attitude is something we have control over, and I think it's very important. And finally, we have control over how kind we are to other people. Our graciousness and our kindness is something that is completely in our control. And I think it's very important during these times that we try and be as tolerant, as kind, and as gracious to everyone we see, people we know and people we don't know, strangers and friends alike. It will all help us to get through this in a better, more healthy way. So,
Bill, thank you.
Those are my thoughts for today. I think. Thanks.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you for your thoughtful words. I just want to piggyback a little bit on what you said about control and what we do have control over. And one of those is that we don't have control over what the courts or the chief and his judges are going to decide for our next PMO or the way that we roll out into reopening of our courts. But what we do have control over is being able to let the courts know what it is that is bothering us, letting the courts know what our concerns are and let the courts know what we foresee as potential issues. So I hope as many people as possible take advantage of sending to the email comments COVID-19 at courts.maine.gov. With that, Bill, thank you so much. Angela, what do we have for business side?
I have one, other than what you can see here with our upcoming guests, I have one thing I've been remiss in saying, in that I wanted to, although she's probably not on this call, say that I'm thankful for my staff, because I one, have an amazing staff, but two, also send a shout out to Valerie Shriver, who just this weekend celebrated her 20th anniversary with the Maine State Bar Association.
Excellent. I also want to throw out there on the personal side that I'm thankful for our Maine National Guard units. If anyone's seen the flyovers that started today, I'd be curious. I know that right about now they're probably heading out over the Bath or down east area. So I'm curious, of course, if anyone's been able to see them. But that being said, and on the Army side also, I know helped train some of the medical units on testing for COVID-19 too. So a shout out to them. Any alibis? All good? All right, tomorrow we have Judge Michael Dubois, and I hope that there are some great questions or concerns being brought up with him when he's on. See you tomorrow. Thanks.